Welcome back, everyone. My guest today has over 25 years of experience in the industry. He's held senior leadership roles in both the federal IT operations space as well as private sector cybersecurity. His work focuses on translating global events, changing power dynamics, and shifting incentives into actionable insights that business leaders can use to make decisions before risk shows up as a failed project, a major incident, or a missed opportunity. You're not going to want to miss this conversation with Elliot Mattice, so stick around.
Oil and petrodollars get fed into the United States stock market. And it's those dollars that are keeping the AI companies and these technology companies at their $1 trillion valuation. I believe that if there's going to be an AI bubble bursting, it's going to be tied back to this war in Iran.
Hey, everybody, real quick before we get into today's episode. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to hit the subscribe and the like button. And if you want to be notified when new episodes are available, ring the bell. Helps us spread our message to a broader audience, and I genuinely appreciate your support of the channel. So let's roll into today's episode. Elliot, thanks for joining me today. Welcome to Shop Talk. I'd like to start, I know you're working currently in the private sector, working as a Chief Innovation and Growth Officer. Can you tell me a little bit about that, and then we'll sort of work back from there into how you got where you are currently?
Sure. This role I joined about 6 months ago. It's with a small minority-owned business out of Maryland. Their primary business area is to do IT services for the government. So I came in with the remit of growing the business, growing their capabilities and their technology. So a lot of the particulars that I'm focused on is AI, automation, trying to get them into post-quantum cryptography and some of these, what I call kind of the beyond the horizon opportunities and services that we can prepare for, so that as they start hitting the industry, our organization is already prepared to deliver that kind of service.
Well, that's it sounds like you're in a position where you have to draw on a lot of expertise, a lot of experience in a number of different areas, different sectors, to make that all line up and to be able to advise on those kinds of things. So
For sure.
I know you come from the federal IT space. You've been in cybersecurity for a long time. What is it that kind of brought you to where you are now? Was this just an opportunity that came up that lined up with what you wanted to be doing, or was there some precipitating event or other reason that you got into this role?
A little bit of everything. So in November of 2024, I was part of a very large corporate layoff and found myself back in the job market in a place that I was not familiar with for many, many years. And so joining this organization was one out of necessity, but it also is in my wheelhouse. It is an exciting opportunity to work for a small company, be the one who is responsible for that growth.
And I would imagine that having seen kind of both sides of the contract negotiation in the federal space puts you in a unique position, because you also have to know how to navigate that world, right? It's one thing to know compliance and to be able to do business development, but it's a completely different animal to be able to navigate the federal contracting space, because it's got its own complexities and nuances that someone from the outside just trying to jump into that could get overwhelmed pretty quickly, it seems like, at least viewing from the outside.
Very much so. I think so. And I'll add to that too, is having an operational background and bringing that into business development, I think is a unique position for me, because I can draw upon all of those experiences. One of the biggest failings I've seen is that you have a business development team. They create a strategy. They say, this is the best way to win this contract, and here's what we're going to do. Eventually, if they're lucky, they'll win that contract, and it goes over to operations. And now operations has this land in their lap, and they don't know how to action this. It doesn't translate into the day-to-day management of those requirements in that contract. So if I kind of work it backwards, I know how to operate a contract. Therefore, I know how to write a good proposal that is compelling to not only an evaluator, but to the operations team, and will actually deliver on the promises of that proposal. Now, to your other point of coming from the commercial side and going into public sector, it is a whole different animal. I've had a number of conversations lately just talking about compliance. And you have, I'm sure most of your audience is familiar with ISO regulations and frameworks and NIST regulations and all of those industry standard ones. And those apply across the public sector. But you also have the Federal Acquisition Regulation, the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation, you have OPM rules, you have executive orders, you have all of these other bits and pieces that are constraints and guardrails around how you can bid and win work, but how you execute work and what are the regulations and requirements that you have to abide by. So a little quick story is my previous employer in 2020, they were doing clinical research for a COVID vaccine. So it was right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I felt like this is how my life is supposed to be. I'm putting together my experience and my background into an organization that is going to change the world. It's going to help during this pandemic by studying this vaccine. And part of that work was funded by Trump's initiative in his first term called Operation Warp Speed, where he threw billions of dollars at vaccine development to get us through that pandemic. So this was largely funded through HHS and those government agencies who had their own requirements. And some of these requirements, when you are the prime contractor, you have to abide by. But you bring in subcontractors, and there's flow down requirements as well. Now, in the clinical research space, there's many small businesses we worked with who had zero experience with the regulation space around government contracting. And as an example of that, there was one subcontractor whose entire business was packaging up testing materials. It could be syringes, it could be test tubes, whatever it might be, and sending those out to the clinical sites. So they really had no connection with the federal government or really a direct relationship with them. But they still had to abide by these regulations by being part of our contract. And I would get on many phone calls with them, and they would have me, can you explain what this clause means? I don't get what this clause means, and how does it apply to me and doesn't? Do I have to get an ATO? What is NIST? What's Section 508? And I went through many, many, many of these. And I realized that there's just not a good place for these small and medium-sized businesses, the ones who might want to break into government contracting, but don't have the guidance on what all of this could mean. So last year I attended the RSA conference. Apologies, this is a very long story. I thought it was short, but
that's why we've got the time blocked out that we do. I like to have the freedom to go into these side quests.
So I attended RSA last year, and I have a strong interest with GRC and the compliance and all of that. So I talked to every compliance company out there, every GRC platform, the Vantas and the everybody. And I said, well, how do you deal with the compliance requirements in the federal government around FARs and DFARs and OPM and executive orders? And to a company, they all said to me, we don't want to touch it. We don't like it. We don't want to get in there. It's too complicated. So to me, they didn't understand it. They didn't understand the benefit or the need for any of this. They're focused on that ISO, NIST, SOC 2 level, that it complies to public sector, private sector, commercial spaces. It doesn't really matter. It's all industry independent.
Right. It's the biggest net they can cast.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So as a hobby project, I started pulling some things together and built a little platform. It's still not quite all the way there a year later. Um, but essentially, what it does is it captures all of those FAR regulations, all of the DFAR regulations, the Homeland Security, all of the ones that I keep repeating, and enables you to take right now a document, upload it into the system, and AI will scan through the document and find these clauses, these requirements for government contracting, and give you what they mean. How do you work with them? Are there any um, crosswalks between other requirements, other frameworks, and give you a plan to how to address them? Um, so it's a tool that I would want to use. It's a tool that I would try to promote for other businesses to use. That, where do you start? How do I even know what to do? Who do I call when I don't understand this clause in this contract that was sent to me? Well, here's a way to do it. Right?
I think that seems like that's where the best tools come from, is someone who finds a gap in what's available and then goes out and says, you know what, this is what I wanted and couldn't find. And so I'm going to bring it to my industry. I'm going to bring it to my peers and say, here you go. This was what I would have been looking for. Is this helpful for you?
Absolutely.
I think that's great.
That's where I came from, and there's other little side projects I'm working on with that very, that start of, this is a problem I'm just trying to solve for myself. I know there's other people out there having the same problem, so maybe it can be useful.
You know, it's funny. I very different industry, very different product, but it was the same struggle I had working in transportation and trucking, trying to find controls and frameworks that were geared towards trucking. You know, because NIST, you throw NIST at somebody that isn't familiar with cybersecurity controls and they just panic, right? It's just
Sure.
overwhelming.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of the businesses out there are small. They're, you know, either really small, couple people wearing all the hats, or they're starting to grow into like a smaller to mid-sized business kind of situation. And where do you turn? Where do you get guidance of how to adopt these controls into your environment? And we don't have the same level of compliance unless you're dealing with, you know, the defense contracting or
Sure.
government contracting. But there's still a need for that guidance. So I guess I go into that just because it's refreshing to see other people who have been like, this is a gap. How do I fill this gap? And then you
Sure.
just go
Yeah.
and head out and do it. So very cool. So obviously you don't wake up one day qualified to do this work. What has the trajectory been like for you? Like what got you into technology, cybersecurity, GRC, all of that stuff? Because I know that's never a straight line, right? It's always everybody tries a different path here and there, and they sort of self-select into their specialization. So I'm just curious how you ended up where you are.
It goes back to the story of my birth.
Well, we've got a while, so
I grew up right outside of Washington, D.C. So just
okay.
by nature of geography, I was kind of deeply embedded into the federal space. My father spent 45 years doing business development for federal contractors. So I later in my career followed his steps. But the story is, I grew up in a small town in Northern Virginia that in the mid to late 90s started to blow up as a East Coast Silicon Valley. And funnily enough, I'm out in Silicon Valley area right now, so I've went the opposite direction. And I've always had an interest in technology. Growing up, I wanted to tear apart our Apple IIc. You know, all of the computer things, the video games, all of that was very interesting to me. So then to have this space around me where suddenly Microsoft and Oracle are coming into town and they're building high rises down where I used to ride my bike, it sort of came to me in a sense. So after high school and I started into college, I bounced around a little bit between what I wanted to do and eventually landed on information technology as it was called at the time. Um, my first job was as a tier one help desk person. The first major project that I was working on, I love to tell the story, was I had a disk and I walked around to 600 workstations to update them by hand for Y2K. And from there, it just your career progresses as you take on more and more responsibilities. So I moved from help desk into server administration and network administration, and the technology grows. So from working on old compact 166 to virtualized systems and cloud systems just naturally evolved. And then in 2010, my wife was offered a contracting job over in Landstuhl, Germany. She's a clinical psychologist working with vets and active duty. So we moved, and it was in Germany that I connected with Computer Science Corporation, and I kind of think of that as the watershed moment where I moved from the keyboard cowboy into the management and strategy level. So I ran a contract with the Department of Defense Education Authority where we did all of the IT support for the dependent schools, military schools throughout the European theater. So for a couple of years, it was in Europe, managing those contracts, managing those people. And then as we returned to the States, we knew we always wanted to end up back in the DC area. So it was natural to slide right back into the federal space in the DC area where I worked for TSA. So when we're talking trucking, it makes me think of my transportation background as well. With TSA, I ran the operations for the contract. I had about 500 people underneath me that delivered services for TSA. We did the entirety of their infrastructure and cybersecurity, and we had people in all the airports and all that fun stuff. So, it was right around that period I guess it was 2012, 2013, where I got more and more involved in cybersecurity, more and more involved in running SOCs and incident command centers. And I remember reading about Stuxnet, and it was just the most fascinating story to me. And, from there, wanting to be more involved in that side of it. I think the operations side, again, as technology evolves, it evolves to be more and more self-sufficient, right? You don't have to tend to the garden as much, right? So the cloud services are operating. It's essentially babysitting, babysitting the servers, make sure the lights are on and the backups run. All very important aspects. So no offense to anybody who's doing the operations, it's still critical. But I'd spent my time doing that, and I wanted to do something a little bit more. I don't know, edgy the word comes to mind, right? It's a little more like statecraft and spycraft and good guys and bad guys, the cat and mouse games, and I really enjoyed all of that. As much as I'm not as technical as I used to be, but being able to look at indicators of compromise and the attack thresholds and methods and tools, it's every day is something new. It's a way to learn. So it's all very exciting to me. And then I'm sure you're going to ask me about it, but the layering in the geopolitical atmosphere around this, and it's not just tools and vulnerabilities and accesses, but what's behind it all, and who's pushing the various buttons, and how do you get ahead of it? So it's just it expands layers and layers and layers for me. Like how how much further can you go? And there always seems to be another layer to go.
Yeah, it's so true. As you kind of move up that career progression and your aperture widens at each stage, you sort of become aware of the layer of complexity above you. And that there isn't really a finite, like, oh, okay, I'm at the top. I have all the visibility. I can see all the things. It's like there's always just increasing complexity and an increasing, I think of a chessboard. The board just keeps getting bigger, and you can see more and more of it. And that's exactly what jazzes me about this stuff too. Is it isn't in a vacuum. It's not just technical cybersecurity TTPs and bad actors and defenders and that type of thing. It does tie directly into world dynamics, geopolitics, domestic politics, domestic policy, the economy. All of these things tie together to create the environment that either builds the threat landscape or impacts it in a positive way. Either of those two. So obviously, if we're gonna cover any of the geopolitics and the influences there, there's been a lot of changes in recent history. We'll say, you can go back as far as you want, but obviously, right now specifically, we're seeing some major dynamic shifts and changes in the players and influences out there with the conflict in Iran. And I'm curious, obviously you have a distinct background and a perspective on all of this type of stuff. How is the current disruption, I guess we could call it, changing the play, changing the dynamics in the field from what you see right now?
What's interesting to me, and I'll see if I can tie this into cybersecurity, but what's most interesting to me is when you've looked at previous conflicts and wars, particularly in the Gulf states, when the United States has been involved, it is focused on a regime change, the war against terrorism, right?
Right.
And you have a fairly direct line between the opponent's interests and the American interests. Iran they're playing this differently, and you can see it where when after Iran was attacked, their counterattacks were not all directed back at Israeli or American assets. They were sending drones into Dubai, hitting hotels, hitting the airports. They hit ports in Qatar and in other the Gulf states there. What I'm seeing and what I'm feeling about that is they are not looking to fight the Americans, fight the Israelis in a historically standard battle. They want to economically destroy the world. And their means of doing that is, the attacks on Dubai. Dubai Airport is the busiest airport in the world. So they sent drones in there. They've shut that airport down. You have, I think it's about 70% of the population in Dubai are Western expats. There's a lot of money coming in through Europe and America and Asia into Dubai. So now Dubai, which was this it's like sanctuary in the Middle East of this very wealthy, very clean, very safe space, is now not safe anymore. The money's going to dry up. The people are leaving. You probably saw the news where people are paying upwards of $250,000 for flights out of that area. So when Iran attacks this in this manner, it's asymmetrical. So they're trying to cripple the world in different ways. They shut down the port of Hormuz. They are going to, I believe, start attacking some of the water salination plants within the other Arab states. They're going to block food deliveries in there. So echoing about the potential for an AI bubble to burst. And I don't think it's going to be because AI isn't delivering on its promises, that these businesses are not going to be able to perform the way they want to, or their stockholders are going to pressure them in certain ways. I believe that if there's going to be an AI bubble bursting, it's going to be tied back to this war in Iran. So what do we do about this, right? That's the question. How do you prepare for something that might have these second, third order effects that are not directly tied to technology or cybersecurity or all of that, right? And that's the question I'm still trying to work out. I mean, the typical response is, well, you batten down the hatches, you ensure that your controls are set, you ensure that you have backups, that your supply chains are all validated and checked out, and all of that is still 100% necessary. But there's another element that's missing there, and I'm not sure I've been able to really put my finger on it yet. But in my gut, it's telling me that's just not going to be enough this time.
Well, it is interesting because this is a very asymmetrical conflict. Militarily there's no question of a a military outcome in this situation. But what you see, and like you said, it's the economic, the infliction of economic pain, and then you're seeing also in the types of targeting that we are seeing in the cyberspace, where it's all critical infrastructure, it's all power, water, gas, and again, that's not designed to inflict damage on a military opponent. That's designed to inflict damage and pressure internally in your opponent's home turf, and make daily life less comfortable and impact the economy negatively. Yeah. And so I agree that it seems like this particular conflict is a flashpoint that is obviously a rapidly evolving thing. I mean, who knows by the time we get this on air what may have changed. Sure. But it's definitely something that's fast moving, and I agree with you that we can build in redundancies for cloud providers. We can build in, incident response plans, and we've got our disaster recovery thought out, and we're testing our backups. But the scale of a disruption of this magnitude does seem to outpace some of that. And how do you can't have a redundant global dynamic. You know what I mean? Like there is one global dynamic, and that's what everyone is stuck playing with. So I think that's an interesting question of what do you do with that to prepare? And I don't think I have a good answer for that. I'm certainly in the same boat where I'm thinking it through. But
the only thing that I think you can do is, and I don't want to plug myself here a little bit, is look upstream. So the idea that I have is this upstream risk methodology, and it essentially uses game theory to look at the signals of what's occurring, and it could be months ahead of time. So we saw the United States having military buildup for months in the Gulf. So there was indications back, I would say even as far back ago as Thanksgiving of 2025, that this is going to happen in some degree at some point in the future. So if you have to ask yourself, would I rather have 6 months to prepare and work out scenarios, or do I want to wait until those first rockets were fired to now figure out what do I do? Certainly I'd want the 6 months. The challenge then is, how much can you figure out based on the information that you have? And what are those adjustments that you can make that won't steer you too far away from where you need to be? So as I talked about this in my my talk at Simply CyberCon, was the smallest impactful choices that you can make. And if you make those, then you can monitor them and even undo them later if the scenario didn't play out the way you wanted. And it's hard to really give you a concrete example of that because all the scenarios are different, all of the business needs are different. Um, but maybe here's one, right? I'll move away from Iran into India. India and Pakistan have had some skirmishes along their border. They've had some, uh, you know, political uprisings and protests around that area. Now, many companies have some kind of outsourcing into that region. So if you see this happening and you see these skirmishes, you see that there are um, protests and things going on, there is a possibility that that will escalate. And can you take a look at what your supply chain is? Do I have a data center in India or a call center? Can I reroute that over to somewhere else? Can I go to Indonesia or Mexico or have a backup facility in the United States? There are ways to get upstream from this if you're not ignoring the signals.
Yeah, and like you said, it's the smallest meaningful step. As is, I think that was the term that you used, or it's so important because you can't see, to take the India-Pakistan conflict, you can't see that and pull everything out of India and reshore everything or move to another location. But you do need to have that as an ultimate possibility that you're prepared for, and
Sure.
know what steps you're going to need to take to get there, and what are the other off ramps along the way there.
Yeah, in that sense, it's almost like a tabletop exercise that you're doing of, what happens here? What are the possibilities? If I can't shut down this data center or this call center, is it possible to have the people move remotely and work from home or something to that nature? I think where there's a lot of challenge is organizations and leadership are not looking at risk until it's too late.